Hi, I'm Julie Sweetland from the Frameworks Institute, and you are tuning in to the fifth episode of our online video series exploring research findings and recommendations from the Farming and Food Narrative Project. Thanks for joining. In this video, I'll be walking through the first of 6 reframing recommendations emerging from the research Frameworks conducted in partnership with the Farming and Food Narrative Project. When we asked the public about food and farming and related topics, we uncovered several mental models that people have of food. And we found that the most prominent, top of mind way that people think about farming is through the lens of food. Farming exists, people reason, to allow us all to eat. Now that makes sense on one way, but it's oversimplified. And it has implications for our field. When people equate farming with food production, they want to see growing methods that they believe yield the best food. And what is that exactly? Well, this leads to the good food equals healthy food cultural model or mental model. When people evaluate food, they do so in terms of human health. People reason that good food is food that's good for you, providing maximum nutrition. Now, a second model involves nature and human society as totally distinct. People think of natural as untouched by human endeavors and as pure and healthy. Human intervention, on the other hand, intervenes with and often pollutes and defiles nature. These models aren't wrong or bad per se. Of course, we all want healthy food, and it's true that whole foods, less processed foods, are generally healthier for people. But when it comes to thinking about farming, these two models work together in ways that limit public understanding and support for sustainable and balanced approaches to crop production. When reasoning from the good food equals healthy food model, people think that the primary purpose of farming is to promote consumer health, or at least not to harm it. They say that the priority should be protecting and enhancing eaters' health. And they don't think much at all about the health of people who work on farms or any other impacts of farming. They also are susceptible to overstated claims, right, about what can affect their health when it comes to crops. Now, on the second model here, nature is greater than human made. When people look at nature and humanity as distinct and opposing systems, they assume that farming should involve as little as human intervention as possible. And from there, they reason that it should use few, if any, human-made substances. Augmenting grains, fruits, or vegetables through technology or synthetic substances are seen not only as less healthy to eat, but damaging to nature and even morally questionable. All right, a third mental model involves the assumption that food is solely, primarily a consumer good. From this perspective, the farming and food system is assumed to be a free marketplace where farmers simply supply what the market demands. People assume that consumer preference is what determines that what gets grown, how much of it is grown, and how it is grown. This leads people to reason that if there are any problems with farming or any responsibility for addressing them, that has little to do with government or the food industry and everything to do with consumer choices. The consumerist model tells us that if we want to support good farming practices, we have to educate ourselves and shop differently. And again, it's not that that can't be part of the equation, but within this model, it's hard for people to see how organizing, voting, or advocating for systems change would make a difference for farming. Put together all three of these mental models, when we start conversations about farming with the theme of food, we activate these mental models. And once people are thinking about food, they gravitate toward thinking about individual safety or eating experience. And from here, people readily endorse anything that they perceive to promote the supposed purity of food, whether or not it objectively reduces consumer risks. And people definitely aren't thinking about what it takes to produce this type of food or the people who are involved in growing the food. and whether or not, for example, they have jobs that allow them to make decisions and earn a decent living. Overall, when we start our communications with food, when we frame in terms of food, we make it less likely that people will consider the common good, the policy context, or other factors that aren't about personal preferences or risks. And if our goal is to build understanding of more sustainable farming and what society can do to support it, leading with food leads us further from our goal. So our first recommendation for reframing farming is simple. Start with farming, not food. To put that recommendation in practice, it might be as simple as switching up the images you use to illustrate your work. Instead of a photo that only includes the crop you grow, use a photo that includes a grower or otherwise shows the activity of farming. Another way to act on this recommendation is to make sure that at least some of your general outreach speaks to farming, not just food. For example, if you use social media marketing to attract visitors to your farm, it'd be important to devote some posts to, quote unquote, the cause. Take this example on the screen. On the left, the post is framed in a way that appeals to the audience as a consumer. On the right, the post is framed in a way that appeals to the audience as a learner, as a member of the public. And for agritourism sites to participate in a strategy that's all about getting people to understand more about farming, having posts like the one on the right and just having them in the mix is key. Those are just two examples. The main idea is to move away from the habit of trying to connect with audience as eaters. Instead, begin by hooking your audience with stories about the people involved in farming or a dilemma of farming. You can also lead with one of the farming strategies we explore in the later episodes in the series. Things like making the story about interconnection or talking about how farming can contribute to the types of communities we want. Some specific strategies to start with farming, not food, is to, again, hook your audiences with something that's about farming, lean toward images of people working on farms rather than images that only show that beautiful produce you're putting out, and include images of farmers engaged in civic action and community events. Here are some other ways to illustrate what this recommendation is about. Again, instead of connecting or thinking of your audience as eaters, think about your audience as community members. And instead of starting with a story that's, if you eat, you care about farming, instead think of the story you're telling as farming matters to us all. And instead of only positioning your worth or your value or the value of the farming sector as farmers feed society, talk about society and farming as interdependent. This strategy isn't a panacea. This recommendation, rather, start with farming, not food, isn't a cure-all. It's not a panacea. It's just one piece of a larger farming strategy, but it does make a difference. If you want to learn more about the research behind this strategy or see more ways to apply it, you can check out these reports and the toolkit that we've built. And you can also keep exploring by visiting farmingandfoodnarrative.org, or by watching the next video in our series. I hope you'll stick with us. Thanks for joining this one.